So what do you do when the bottom drops out of our world and nothing makes sense? We cry out to God, and God seems a million miles away or just doesn't care. Well, that's what we want to talk about as we turn to Habakkuk. The Assyrians had conquered Israel in the north and hauled them off. It was only a matter of time until they would conquer Judah in the south. And Habakkuk is trying to sort out why would a good, righteous and holy God allow such abuse of his people? God, why don't you do something to stop this? And God responds, actually, I am doing something. I am raising up the evil Babylonians, and I'm going to use them to discipline and haul my people off into captivity. And this isn't the answer that Habakkuk was expecting, and is more confused than ever. Why would a holy and loving God do such a thing to his people? Habakkuk is trying to sort this out. And we pick it up now in chapter 2 from verse 1. I will stand at my watch and station myself on the ramparts. I will look to see what he will say to me and what answer I am to give to this complaint. There were always watchmen on the wall looking out, making sure that an enemy wasn't coming to attack and send a warning. And that was an imagery of the prophet warning the people that God was going to bring correction on his people if they didn't clean up their act. And Habakkuk is saying, I've taken the message of God out to the people. That God's going to raise up the Babylonians and teach us a lesson. And the people have rebuked Habakkuk. How could a good, holy, righteous and faithful God do that? They're rebuking Habakkuk, and so now he's waiting for God to give him an answer. What am I supposed to say to them? Because Habakkuk himself is confused by all that's going on. And it's possible there are those listening to me right now, and your life has always worked out for you. Maybe a few bumps along the way, but it's always fallen into place and made sense. If that's true, God bless you, good for you. But there are a whole lot of people listening and saying, there have been times when life made no sense. I don't understand where God is during all of this. The Psalms are filled with those discussions, and you can't find a single time where God rebukes someone for saying that to him. You see, the reality is, we live in a sin-cursed world, and there's going to be painful suffering and struggles where at times life just makes no sense. And we might as well be honest and talk to God about it. God, I don't understand why it has to be this way. And I don't think God rebukes us for that. God meets us in our pain and begins a process of healing. And the Lord replies to Habakkuk, write down the revelation and make it plain on tablets so that a herald may run with it. Do we realize how unusual this is? Habakkuk is not so much a preacher as an advertiser. He wrote down God's message for people to see as they ran for their lives and for their survival. An advertising executive was at a convention in New York. Every morning, leaving the hotel and walking through a park to the convention center, he passed a blind man with a begging bowl and cardboard message. I am blind. Returning late afternoon each day, he noticed that the man had little in his bowl. On the final morning, he stopped and said, excuse me, but I'm in advertising. May I add 4 words to your notice? I think that you will get more money. The man agreed, and the executive took his message, I am blind, and added, it is spring, and I am blind. Later in the day, he noticed that the man had done very much better. We may not be a preacher, but we can write a letter or send an email. Thank God there is no mould. When I was young and new to preaching, I greatly admired Billy Graham. This is embarrassing, but it's the truth. I practice being like Billy Graham. I noticed he put his hand into his pocket with his thumb out. You look at the early black and white footage of him, you'll see that what he does. So I thought, if I'm to have the anointing of God on my ministry, I need to have my hand in my pocket with my thumb out. And then I noticed that he held his Bible up a lot and pointed at it. And so I did that. And I remember in the very early days of doing my Billy Graham thing, I finished preaching. It was North London. I can remember it well. I wish I couldn't, but I can. And I was walking to the front of the church where I was going to greet people, and a lady, an elderly one, walked by me. I think she was going to the kitchen to get me a cup of tea. And she stopped, and she was obviously hard of hearing because she spoke in a very loud voice, so everybody in the small congregation would have heard her. Well, young man, we can't all be Billy Graham, can we? But I needed to hear that. And I needed to realise God has made me a certain way and can use me that way. You can use a pencil for certain things, you can use a hammer for certain things, but don't confuse the two. And every one of us is unique. Even identical twins, when you get to know them, are not that identical. And that means that God can use me in human history like no one else can be used, past, present, or future, because we are unique beings before him. Habakkuk was to make posters and get a herald to run with it so that people could read the message from God at such a desperate time. By the way, in those days, very little was written down. So for God to say, I'm going to give you the revelation, write it down and give it to a herald, this was highly unusual. And 2,500 years later, the herald is declaring that answer to us. For the revelation awaits an appointed time. It speaks of the end and will not prove false. Though it linger, wait for it. It will certainly come and will not delay. God is saying, I have a plan and purpose. I am executing it one step at a time. There are times when it seems like nothing makes sense. You must wait and be patient. You must trust me. By the time the story ends, I will have completed my plan and purpose. Trust me. God promised Abraham, a nation will come from you. That nation has been reduced to the tiny little kingdom of Judah, who is about to go up against the massive Babylonian empire who has crushed the Assyrians, crushed the Egyptians, and no question they will crush Judah. And it seems like this is the end of the story. How could this make sense? And yet God is saying, trust me, I made a promise and I will keep that promise. If someone were to gamble on that nation's survival, the odds would be 1,000 to none. And yet God continues to execute his plan. This verse is quoted in Hebrews 10 in reference to the Messiah. And even though it seems hopeless, God has continued to execute his plan. He brought forth the Messiah just as he said he would, and he is still working his plan centuries later. We love stories of believers who go through suffering and struggle which makes no sense, but they come out of it triumphant. But the fact is, thousands of Christians have died in prison without the story resolved. I mean, we love Hebrews 11, referring to it as the faith halls of fame, because it lists all these great people of faith. But the chapter talks about a whole lot of those heroes of faith who died in prison without the story resolved. And they believed, God, you tell the truth. But they went to their grave without the promise fulfilled, just trusting that one day God would keep his promise. Always remember that God is busy at work, and we must trust that when nothing makes sense, it's still true. And this leads us into verse 4, which is the key statement of the whole prophecy, the whole book. It's quoted 3 times in the New Testament. See, he is puffed up. His desires are not upright, but the righteous will live by his faith. Talking specifically about the Babylonians and the wicked within Judah, and today talking about anyone who thinks he or she can fight God and win. Whether we're talking about a nation, whether you're talking about an individual listening right now, if we think we can take on the God of the universe and win, there is something deeply wrong with us. That's what he means when he says his desires are not upright. What would possess someone to think that I somehow can rebel against the God of the universe, and at the end of the story I will win? Frankly, to believe that something inside of us is deeply wrong. In the middle of all the confusion and uncertainties, what is the way to go then? The righteous will live by his faith. In other words, we are all about God's ways, plan and purpose. We choose to live a selfless, love my neighbour kind of life in a greedy, selfish, law of the jungle culture, because we believe when the story is finally told, God wins. Anything that I choose to invest myself in that is contrary to God is a losing proposition. So I say it and mean it. At the end of the day, no matter how difficult the odds may seem, God wins. And if I want to win, then I align myself with God. It's a naive thinking God must be on the side of the Babylonians just because he uses them against Judah. In the short term, they look like winners. In the long run, it will be different. All of life needs to be reckoned with from that perspective. Remember how Jesus finished his Sermon on the Mount? There's a narrow and a broad road. If you get on the broad road, you can get plenty of luggage, plenty of company, plenty of all sorts of things. You look like a winner. On the narrow road, you're very limited in your company, in your baggage, so much. But look at the end of that road. Get that bigger perspective. You in that narrow road are getting all of your troubles over now, with none to come in eternity, which is just when the unbelievers will begin. It's what Jesus said. And Babylon was not going to get away with anything, as the rest of chapter 2 shows. The Babylonians consumed massive amounts of alcohol to numb themselves to the slaughter in which they engaged. And there are 5 woes pronounced. This was a cry associated with a funeral. And these people were still alive, but as good as dead because of how they were living. Jesus' first sermon began with the word blessed, but he also cursed. Go to the Lake of Galilee. It's a lovely place. In Jesus' day, it was urbanized and rejected him. And Jesus cursed every town around the lake but Tiberia. The only town that survived down the centuries is Tiberia. Jump off a cliff and the law of gravity will break us. And we can't break God's laws, they will break us. What Babylon did to others would come back on them. Look at how the outcome is spelt out. Woe to him who piles up stolen goods and makes himself wealthy by extortion. How long must this go on? Will not your debtors suddenly arise? Will they not wake up and make you tremble? Then you will become their victim. Because you have plundered many nations, the peoples who are left will plunder you. For you have shed man's blood, you have destroyed lands and cities and everyone in them. What they have done to others will be done to them. We've all kinds of ways of saying this, haven't we? You will make your bed and you will lie in it. What goes around comes around. You live by the sword, you die by the sword. You will reap what you sow. We have all these sayings that say the same thing. If we, with greed, selfishness and materialism, create a culture in which we think we're going to benefit, it's a culture that will ultimately consume us because we will be eaten by the monster we have created. It's just contrary to everything God is about. Woe to him who builds his realm by unjust gain to set his nest on high, to escape the clutches of ruin. That's describing an eagle's nest in a remote location where that eagle is so far away from a predator, it seems like nothing could get to this eagle. The rich, the powerful, the movers, the shakers, the terrorists, the killers, the bad guys create a context where they think they're untouchable. You have plotted the ruin of many people, shaming your own house and forfeiting your life. The stones of the wall will cry out, and the beams of the woodwork will echo it. If we think we can fight God and win and create a context where we're somehow so rich, so in charge that nobody can touch us, how foolish is that? At the end of the day, God will hold such people accountable. God will make you pay, and even if you kill off all the witnesses, the stones will cry out, the rafters will cry out. In other words, the building materials of your house will cry out and give witness to what you have done before a holy and just God. Woe to him who builds a city with bloodshed and establishes a town by crime. Has not the Lord Almighty determined that the people's labour is only fuel for the fire, that the nations exhaust themselves for nothing? For the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. That paragraph sounds like something that was written yesterday concerning a lot of what's happening in our world. But no matter what nation, no matter what rich and powerful people there are, no matter whatever you are, you fill up your life with, at the end of the day, you can't fight God and win. The nations do this for nothing. When the story's done, they lose. And how can we be sure of this so we keep our faith in God? Here's the answer. For the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. when the story is completed. No bad guys win. Evil doesn't win. God wins. And the knowledge of his glory will be evident across the earth like the waters cover the sea. So woe to him who gives drink to his neighbours, pouring it from the wineskin till they are drunk, so that he can gaze on their naked bodies. You will be filled with shame instead of glory. Now it's your turn. Drink and be exposed. The cup from the Lord's right hand is coming round to you, and disgrace will cover your glory. This warning is a reference to the morality of the Babylonians. Not only are they destroying the towns and the people, but they are raping the women. That's the idea of their nakedness. They get them drunk, they rape them, they shame them. And God is saying, you will be exposed. You will be naked. You will be shamed. What you've done to others will be done to you. Again, it's a warning of what is to come. The violence you have done to Lebanon will overwhelm you, and your destruction of animals will terrify you, for you have shed man's blood. You have destroyed lands and cities and everyone in them. Lebanon was known for its wildlife and beautiful landscape with its cedar trees. And you have raped the people, the land and animals. You have destroyed it all, and God will hold you accountable. So finally, the last warning. Of what value is an idol, since a man has carved it, or an image that teaches lies? For he who makes it trusts in his own creation. He makes idols that cannot speak. Woe to him who says to wood, come to life, or to lifeless stone, wake up. Can it give guidance? It is covered with gold and silver. There is no breath in it. You take a piece of wood cut down from a tree, you carve an image in it, and then you bow down and worship it as if it is God. It doesn't live, it doesn't breathe, it doesn't have power, it can't do anything for you. In your hour of need, you call upon your handmade idol, and there's nothing there, because it's no God. There's only one God. Now, we would say we don't do that. I mean, we're so much more sophisticated than that. We don't carve our own little idols and cover them in gold and worship our own man-made idols, do we? But we worship the gods of money, gods of power, the gods of materialism, the god of significance, the god of pleasure. We have all our own idols, but in our hour of need, those idols have no power to help us. We cry out to the gods that we have lived for, and they don't make the cancer go away, and they don't make the marriage come back, and they don't do anything because they are not really gods. They're man-made idols. So never forget this. The Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth be silent before him. At the end of the day, God will reveal himself, and no one will be laughing, no one will be mocking, no rich and powerful talking back to God. Everyone will be quiet, because in that moment it will be overwhelmingly obvious that God is God. Every knee shall bow, every tongue shall confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God. People say, All religions are equally valid and all roads lead to God. That is just not true. You can't just make up a religion, make up a God and call it good. That doesn't make it true. That doesn't make it God. At the end of the day, it will be about the one true God who has made it possible to have a relationship with him through his Son, Jesus Christ. And this is not a world that ends with God quietly. This world ends with God displaying his glory across the earth like the waters cover the sea. This is where God declares himself to be God, and everyone on the earth goes silent in the realization that this is the one true God. Babylon was being used to judge Judah, but they in turn would be judged. That's why trusting God and aligning ourselves with him is the wisest way to live. Now, I want to finish on a very practical note. The righteous will live by his faith, but how do we handle the inevitable disappointments we face? They can erode our faith in God. Keep living by faith and trusting God. He'll work things out. Yes, but it can be just a cliche. How does this happen? I think that we may need a new faith. Now, I don't mean new as far as we aren't living by faith in our Lord, but new in our grasp of it and the steps we take to stand firm by faith. So, let's take the word new, N-E-W, and use it as a way of reminder of what is involved. And it's modelled by Habakkuk. First, never give up. Habakkuk's name means wrestle. It may be a title rather than his actual name, because wrestling with issues is exactly what he was doing. I will stand at my watch. I will look to see what he will say to me. He is not giving up. And the writer to the Hebrews knew that the church was facing lots of disappointments and dangers. There was the possibility of drifting away from following Christ. So he writes, you need to persevere. In the late 1700s, Charles Simeon was appointed minister of Holy Trinity Church in Cambridge. The parish had wanted another minister, and this fact, combined with Simeon's gospel preaching, quickly alienated them. They locked their rented pews against him, and those who came to hear Simeon were forced to stand in the aisles. When Simeon moved to put benches in the aisles, the church wardens threw them out. He battled with discouragement and at one point wrote out his resignation. He never married, and he had no one to share his heartbreak with. He faced disappointment after disappointment for 12 long years. One day, it just got too much. He later wrote, when I was an object of much contempt and derision in the university, I strolled forth one day, buffeted and afflicted, with my little testament in my hand. The first text which caught my eye was this. They found a man of Cyrene, Simon by name. Him they compelled to bear his cross. Sustained by that text, he went back to the church. Slowly the pews began to open and fill by the time he died. It's estimated that 1/3 of all the Anglican ministers in England had sat under his teaching. He inspired dozens of young men from his church to take the gospel to the far corners of the world. at his death. It took hours for the people to pass by his coffin, thankful to God for this man of the gospel. How do we get through disappointment? When we don't know what to do, let's do what we know to do. Get it? We know to read the Bible and pray. As Paul wrote, we know to press on, to take hold of that for which Christ Jesus took hold of me. Never, never give up. Keep going. It's worth it. Secondly, encourage one another. Habakkuk is trying to encourage the people. The righteous will live by his faith. The Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth be silent before him. I stand in awe of your deeds, O Lord. As Hebrews again says, encourage one another daily. Look around at the people we know and see how we can encourage them. Do you know, the word inspire comes from two Greek words, God breathed. When we inspire others with our words, we are breathing life into them. When was the last time we were mistaken for the Holy Spirit? We are never more identified with him than when we are encouragers, breathing out that encouragement. So never give up. Encourage one another. And third, worship the Lord. Habakkuk isn't just expressing his thoughts, he is composing a psalm of worship. Chapter 3 is a prayer of Habakkuk the prophet on Shigionoth, probably meaning sing to a robust tune. There's something special about worshipping God in company. Worship gets our perspective right. So worship with song and prayer together. I promise you new power to press on if we do this in spirit and truth. Never give up. Encourage one another. Worship the Lord. In the most difficult, confusing, uncertain times of our life, sometimes all we can do is hang on by faith and believe that God has promised through Jesus Christ there is coming a day where there will be no more tears, no more sorrow, no more hatred, no more violence, no more bloodshed. That everything that we long for will come and it will be magnificent. So, in our most difficult moments today, we choose to believe.